let's talk about decimals and fractions. So, what you know about decimals is that I could have a tenths place, and a hundredths place, and a thousandths place, right? I could also have a whole number. So if I had this number, 2.2, that would be 2 and 2/10. If I had 2.27, that's 2 and 27/100. Okay? If you can read these numbers well, writing a decimal as a fraction is actually a very easy thing to do. Very easy thing to do. Read this. This is 2 and 2/10. So I'm going to write 2 and 2/10. And I'm going to double check to make sure I can't simplify it. Okay, both this numerator and denominator are divisible by 2. They have a greatest common factor of 2. So that means I need to simplify the 2/10 to be 1/5. That's a review of simplifying fractions mixed in there. So I read it and I wrote it. This would be 2 and 27/100. Okay, there is no greatest common. The greatest common factor between these two numbers is 1, so I'm done. Okay, maybe I have an example that's something like 1400ths. If I read that 1400ths, I'll write 1400ths. They're both divisible by 2, so I'll write 7/50ths. That's my final answer. Okay, so writing a decimal as a fraction really only depends on your ability to be able to read the decimal, right? Now, what about writing a fraction as a mixed number or a decimal? So let's say I had 2 and 4/5. Okay, so I said 2 and. Well, the same thing when I said and is true when I'm going to fraction to decimal. So this was decimal to fraction. This is fraction to decimal. So this is 2 and what? 4/5. Now the mistake is you cannot write 0.45. Can't do it. All right? In order to change a fraction to a decimal, you have a couple choices. One choice is, can I turn it to tenths or hundredths? Check your tenths or hundredths. All right, well, this is pretty easy to make tenths. I can multiply my numerator and denominator by 2, and I'll have 8/10. Oh, well, 8/10 is 0.8. I'm done. Okay, so here's a side note for you. If your denominator, so these are friendly denominators, very compatible number, factors 2, 5, both make 10, right? Or if it already is a 10. Also 4 and 25, 5 and 20, 50. These are all things that become 100 easily. So these two make 10. These two are easy to make a 10. These are all easy to make into 100. There's a couple that you can easily make into 1,000. The one you usually only see is if they've used 250. Because 250 times 4 is 1,000. So those are compatible things. So let's say I have 4 and 7/10. Okay, so that's 4 and, whoops, 4.7, 4 and 7/10. Fraction to decimal. Right? Now, what if it doesn't work so evenly? There's a couple that you can memorize. There's some fractions that have decimals that you should memorize. 1/3 is 0.3 repeating. You may remember that from some other year of your fraction career. 2/3 is 0.6 repeating. Okay. 1/2 is already 0.5. And that one's also compatible. So that one's a double thing. And then there's a ninths trick that you can use. It's really interesting. If I take 1 and divide it by 9, okay, so 1/9. Check this out. 1 divided by 9, okay, so 9 doesn't go into 1. I put in the decimal point and add a 0. It goes in once, I subtract. It goes in once, I subtract. Add a 0, goes in once, I subtract. So it ends up being 0.11111. Okay? Check out what happens if I have 2/9. 2/9 would be 2 divided by 9. Put in my decimal, add a 0. 2 is 18. Subtract, I get a 2. Add a 0. 2 is 18. Subtract 2, get a 0. So what actually happens is every single one of these, 1/9 is 0.1 repeating. 2/9 is 0.2 repeating. 3/9 is the same thing as a third. That's 0.3 repeating. 4/9 is 0.4 repeating, and on and on and on. So there's a couple of them that follow patterns. If it doesn't follow a pattern and you're supposed to change a fraction into a decimal, do the other thing I did and divide. Okay? So if I'm supposed to figure out what 5/6. 5/6 is supposed to be a decimal. I'm going to take 5 and divide it by 6. So you have to get out of that habit of thinking you're going to divide the bigger number by the smaller number, because this is 5 divided by 6. Add the decimal, add a 0. How many times does it go in? 8, 48, 2, 3, 18, 2, 3. It's going to repeat. So 5/6 is 0.83 repeating. Okay? The last thing in this section is you ordering fractions and decimals. So like if I have a half, 0.75, and 1/15. And I'm supposed to order them from least to greatest. Okay? I might be able to just look at them. I know 1/15 is only 1 out of 15, which is smaller than 1 out of 2. And 0.75 I know is more than a half, so I might be able to just do them this way. Okay? Or I might change one of them to a fraction. Okay, so this is 75/100, which is 3/4. Okay, that's 3/4. All right, well 3/4, yeah, I'm definitely right. 3/4 is more than a half. But notice I didn't order the fraction, I ordered what was originally in my list. Okay? Sometimes you have to go the other way with this and change them all into decimals. All right, and that's your ordering. That concludes 4-4, page 25 in your workbook.